Imagine a history of the United States not built by humble pioneers, but by titans. In the late 1800s, farmers across the Ohio River Valley weren't just finding arrowheads in the soil. They were unearthing human remains measuring 8, 9, and even 10 feet tall. These weren't just skeletons, they were warriors found encased in advanced copper armor, adorned with geometric jewelry that defies the primitive label we've been taught in school. But if you go to a museum today, you won't find them. They've vanished into a black hole of history, allegedly created by the US Army and the Smithsonian, never to be seen again. To understand where they went, we have to look at the organization that was literally paid to make them disappear. Welcome to the Ohio River Valley, a landscape scarred by tens of thousands of mysterious earthworks. From the ground, they look like rolling hills. But from the air, a different reality emerges. Massive, perfect circles, squares, and octagons stretch across the terrain, so mathematically precise they can only be fully appreciated from the clouds. Official history tells us these were built by the Adena and Hopewell cultures, simple nomadic tribes who moved earth with nothing but baskets and bone tools. But the 19th century records of the men who first dug into these mounds tell a far more provocative story. They describe skeletons with double rows of teeth, massive flat skulls, and a physical stature that dwarfs the modern human frame. We are looking at more than just a biological anomaly. We are looking at a systematic memory hole in our collective past. This isn't just a story about tall people. It's a story about a suppressed global civilization that may have used these mounds as part of a high-tech planetary energy grid. Evidence suggests we are walking over the ruins of a lost world, one that has been intentionally scrubbed from our textbooks. But first, let's look at the official story, the wall of silence built to keep us from the truth. To understand how a race of giants could be erased from history, we have to look at the year 1881. This was the moment the official narrative was manufactured. The United States Congress allocated $5,000, a massive sum at the time, specifically for the Smithsonian Institution to settle the Mound Builder question once and for all. Before this, the public was captivated by the idea of a lost advanced race. But the government needed a simpler story to justify the expansion into the West. Major John Wesley Powell, the head of the Bureau of Ethnology, instituted a strict policy that would change archaeology forever. He effectively mandated that no lost race theories could be published in official reports. History had to be a straight line, from the primitive savage to the modern civilized man. Any evidence that suggested an ancient civilization was more advanced or physically superior to us was viewed as a threat to this new social order. In 1894, a man named Cyrus Thomas published the Report on the Mound Explorations of the Bureau of Ethnology. This became the Bible of American archaeology. It officially labeled every account of a giant as an exaggeration, a flat-out lie, or the misidentification of a prehistoric elephant. The Smithsonian's word became law. If they said the giants didn't exist, then as far as academia was concerned, they never did. But here is the first major red flag. The Smithsonian's own early records betray them. If you dig into the annual report of the Board of Regents from 1872, 1882, and 1883, before the 1894 standardization, the truth slips through the cracks. In the 1872 report, page 401, the Smithsonian explicitly describes a skeleton found in a mound in Kanawha County, measuring 7 feet 6 inches long. Why was 7.5 feet scientific fact in 1872, but suddenly an impossible myth by 1894? This wasn't an isolated incident. Throughout the late 1800s, local museum curators across Ohio began reporting a strange, recurring pattern. Whenever a farmer or a local digger discovered an anomalous skeleton, representatives, often described as men from the Smithsonian, would arrive shortly after. They would take possession of the remains, pack them into wooden crates, and transport them back to Washington, D.C. These remains never entered the public catalogue. They were never put on display. They simply vanished into the archives of the institution. What were they so afraid of? If these were just exaggerations, why go to such extreme lengths to seize the physical evidence and silence the discoverers? The official story was a wall of silence. But as we're about to see, the documents they forgot to burn tell a much darker story. If the Smithsonian's goal was to scrub the record clean, they missed a few spots. The local newspapers and county records of the 19th century are a goldmine of suppressed data. Take the case of the Sayre Mound. On May 4, 1891, the New York Times published a report that would be considered science fiction today. Archaeologists working near Moundsville unearthed a burial chamber containing several skeletons. One of them stood out, a massive figure described as being of gigantic size. This wasn't just a tall man. The reports specify a height of over 9 feet. To put that in perspective, the average man in 1890 stood barely 5 feet, 6 inches tall. Finding a 9-foot human in an ancient mound is the biological equivalent of finding a person today who stands 12 feet tall. It's an impossibility, according to our current understanding of genetics. But the physical size was only half the mystery. This individual was found encased in copper armor, featuring craftsmanship that appeared far beyond the Stone Age tools supposedly used by the Adena. Why would a primitive hunter-gatherer be buried in a suit of metal that matches the metallurgical skills of the old world? As we look closer at these reports, a strange biological trait begins to emerge across dozens of independent discoveries: the double row of teeth. In the 1880s, the Cincinnati Enquirer and several local Ohio journals documented skeletons found in stone burial vaults with a condition known as polydontia. These weren't just dental deformities. These were massive, robust skulls where 2 full rows of teeth lined the upper and lower jaws. This specific trait is mentioned so frequently in the Ohio River Valley records that it suggests a distinct genetic lineage, a race of people completely different from modern Homo sapiens. We see this same anomaly in the accounts of the giant kings of the ancient world across the ocean. Is it possible these weren't just tall people, but a different species entirely? The visual evidence, while rare, is haunting. Look at the photograph from the Cresap Mound excavation, archived by the West Virginia Archaeological Society. In the grainy black and white frame, you can see the skeleton laid out in the earth. If you use the tools of the excavators or the height of the men standing nearby for scale, the proportions are staggering. The femur bone alone appears nearly twice the size of a standard human thigh bone. If the legs were that long, the standing height would easily cross the 8 or 9 foot mark. Critics will say that ground pressure flattens and elongates bones over time. But ground pressure doesn't create double rows of teeth. It doesn't forge copper breastplates with geometric precision, and it certainly doesn't explain the Smithsonian field notes from researchers like Cyrus Thomas himself. In the original handwritten notes held at the National Anthropological Archives, measurements for skeletons are often much larger than what appeared in the final published reports. It appears the numbers were rounded down or redacted entirely before reaching the public eye. Imagine a researcher standing in a dark mound, measuring a thigh bone longer than his own torso, only to be told by his superiors that his tape measure must be broken. What we are seeing is a paper trail that leads directly to a lost chapter of human history, a chapter where giants weren't legends, but the rulers of the land. This wasn't just a local anomaly. When we zoom out and look at the geometry of these mounds, we see they are part of something much larger. We aren't just looking at graves. We are looking at the remnants of a global standard of technology and architecture that connects Ohio to the rest of the ancient world. When we talk about the mound builders, we are often led to believe we are discussing isolated groups of people living in the woods of Ohio. But what if we zoom out? If we look at the sheer scale and mathematical precision of these sites, the primitive label falls apart. This is where the connection to the Tartarian Empire becomes undeniable. The Tartaria theory suggests that a global, highly advanced civilization existed as recently as a few centuries ago, a civilization that used the Earth's natural frequency and geometry as a source of power. Ohio sits at the very heart of this ancient grid. Take, for example, the Newark earthworks, specifically the Great Octagon. This isn't just a pile of dirt. It is a massive lunar observatory that tracks the 18.6-year cycle of the Moon with a precision of 0.1 degree. How does a primitive tribe, without a written language or advanced surveying tools, execute a project that requires a deep understanding of spherical trigonometry? The answer might be that they didn't invent this knowledge. They inherited it from a global standard. If you compare the geometry of the Newark earthworks to the star forts found in Europe, Russia, and Asia, the similarities are staggering. We see the same recurrence of the golden ratio, the same use of pi dollars, and the same geodetic alignments. It suggests a unified global technological standard. Some researchers believe these mounds weren't just graves or temples. They were energy nodes, geodetic markers placed on specific ley lines to harvest telluric currents from the Earth itself. In the Tartarian narrative, the mid-19th century, roughly between 1850 and 1920, marks a period known as the Great Reset. This was a time of massive upheaval, potentially involving a cataclysmic mud flood that buried the lower levels of the Old World's architecture. Look at the timeline of Ohio's development during this era. This was the period when thousands of mounds were systematically destroyed. They were leveled to make way for canals, railroads, and the foundations of new cities. Was this truly progress, or was it a deliberate campaign to erase the power nodes of the previous civilization? If you were trying to restart society under a new, controllable energy paradigm, the first thing you would do is destroy the evidence of the old free energy system. And then there are the inhabitants. If Ohio was a key territory in this Tartarian expansion, who were the people running it? This is where the 9-foot skeletons come back into play. Some theorists suggest these giants weren't just a random mutation. They were the administrators, or the elite of the Tartarian era. Their massive size and unique biology, such as the double rows of teeth and flat skulls, might suggest they were a different branch of humanity designed for a different environment. The copper armor and advanced metallurgy found in the mounds match the tech levels of the Old World, not the Stone Age tools we are told the Adena used. We find copper breastplates in Ohio that are nearly identical to those found in ancient Scythian or Tartarian burial mounds in Eurasia. How did the same metallurgical Dena end up on two different continents separated by a massive ocean? Official history says it's a coincidence. The Tartaria theory says it's because the ocean wasn't a barrier, it was a highway for a unified empire. Imagine a world where these giants stood atop the Newark Octagon, overseeing a landscape of wireless energy and precision geometry. It sounds like science fiction, because we have been conditioned to believe that we are the most advanced humans to ever walk the Earth. But if we are the peak of evolution, why are our modern buildings crumbling after 50 years while these earthworks have stood for thousands? Why is our energy grid fragile and expensive while the ancient grid was built into the very crust of the planet? The destruction of the mounds was the destruction of a library. Every time a mound was leveled, A piece of the Tartarian puzzle was lost, and every time a skeleton was crated up by the Smithsonian, a witness to that civilization was silenced. The Great Reset wasn't just about changing the maps, it was about changing our minds. They had to make us believe we were alone in the dark, building from nothing. They had to hide the fact that we are living in the ruins of a Titan's playground. The truth was buried under layers of dirt and lies, but as the 20th century dawned, the cover-up had to evolve. It wasn't enough to just dig them up anymore. They had to ensure that no one would ever be allowed to look at them again. If this civilization was so advanced, why don't we see it today? Because the suppression never stopped, it just became professional. The transition from discovery to denial was handled with military precision. And that's exactly where we're going next. If you think the cover-up ended with the Victorian era, you haven't looked at the legal landscape of modern archaeology. Today, the disappearance of anomalous remains is handled through a sophisticated legal framework called NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990. On the surface, NAGPRA is a culturally significant law meant to return ancestral remains to their rightful descendants. It is a noble goal. However, many independent researchers believe it has become a legal shredder for inconvenient history. When a skeleton is found today that doesn't fit the standard model, perhaps one that is 8 feet tall or features a different cranial structure, it is immediately classified as Native American. Under NAGPRA, the remains are often handed over to a tribal authority and reburied within days. No DNA testing is permitted. No carbon dating is allowed. Public photography is strictly prohibited. The evidence is literally returned to the dirt before an independent scientist can even verify its existence. The secret is kept under the guise of cultural sensitivity, but the Earth is beginning to give up its secrets in other ways. We no longer have to dig to see what's hidden. Recent scans using ground-penetrating radar at sites like the Serpent Mound in Ohio have revealed something the history books say shouldn't be there. The scans show older, massive stone foundations sitting deep beneath the earthwork. These foundations suggest the site is thousands of years older than the official Adena timeline. More importantly, the geometry of these lower layers is far more complex than the mounds on top. It's as if a later, less advanced culture tried to replicate something much older and more powerful. Yet, despite these findings, the Smithsonian and major universities refuse to excavate these lower levels. They claim it would disturb the site, but many believe they are afraid of what a deeper dig would reveal. There is also a persistent, darker connection involving the US military. During the mid-20th century, the US Army Corps of Engineers was tasked with massive dredging projects along the Ohio River. During the construction of several dams and locks, workers reported unearthing large-scale human remains and megalithic stone slabs. According to several accounts from retired workers, these sites were immediately cordoned off. The remains weren't sent to a university, they were removed under military escort. Why would the Army Corps of Engineers care about ancient bones? Unless, of course, those bones represented a history that would undermine the government's narrative of our origins. We see a consistent pattern: discover, classify, and remove. Whether it's through the Smithsonian in 1890 or the legal maneuvers of the 1990s, the goal remains the same. They are protecting a timeline that is fragile. If just one of those 9-foot skeletons were put on public display, with DNA results showing a non-standard human origin, the entire house of cards would collapse. History is written by the victors. And in the case of the Ohio River Valley, the victors have a very specific reason to keep the giants buried in the dark. But as the modern world wakes up to the gaps in our story, the question isn't did they exist, but what were they trying to tell us? Why does it matter if a race of giants built mounds in Ohio thousands of years ago? Why should we care about redacted Smithsonian reports from the 19th century? It matters because history is the foundation of our reality. If the foundation is a lie, everything built on top of it is unstable. If the Tartaria theory is correct, and these mounds were actually power hubs for a global grid, then we are living in a state of manufactured scarcity. Acknowledging the giants means acknowledging that a superior, potentially more advanced version of humanity existed before us. It means admitting that history is not a straight line of constant progress, but a cycle of peaks and resets. We are told that we are the smartest, most technologically advanced humans to ever walk the earth. This narrative keeps us dependent on the current systems of energy, medicine, and control. But if a race of titans once harnessed the Earth's natural frequency for free, without wires, without coal, and without a monthly bill, the modern academic industrial complex loses its authority. Hundreds of billions of dollars in research grants and institutional prestige are tied to the standard model of history. The people who write the textbooks are the same people who fund the excavations. They benefit from a history that is small, manageable, and primitive. A history of giants is too big for their boxes. It suggests that we are not the masters of this world, but the inheritors of a ruined estate. If they can successfully hide a race of 9-foot giants from only 150 years ago, what else are they hiding today? What other biological or technological anomalies are currently being crated up and stored in windowless government warehouses? The reset wasn't a one-time event in the 1800s. It is a continuous process of managing what the public is allowed to know about our potential. When you look at the Newark Octagon or the Serpent Mound, don't just see a tomb. See a blueprint. See a message left by a civilization that understood the Earth in a way we are only beginning to rediscover. The evidence is literally beneath our feet, waiting for a generation that is brave enough to stop looking at the map and start looking at the ground. The story of Ohio's giants is more than just a collection of dusty newspaper clippings and forgotten skeletons. It is a glimpse into a world that was never meant to be remembered. The evidence is clear. The 1894 Smithsonian report didn't solve a mystery. It created a cover-up. From the 9-foot skeleton of the Sayre Mound to the mathematical perfection of the Newark Octagon, the physical reality of a lost, superior civilization is staring us in the face. We are not the first to build greatness on this continent. We are walking amongst the ruins of a global Tartarian era built by a race of giants who understood the very frequency of our planet. History isn't what actually happened. It's just the story they decided to tell you. But as we have seen, the bones do not lie. Go to your local library. Look at the county records and old property maps from before 1900. You might be surprised at what was found in your own backyard before the men in suits arrived. If you found this investigation eye-opening, share this video before the algorithms decide it's misinformation. Comment below, why do you think they are so desperate to keep the giants buried? Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay tuned as we dig deeper into the forbidden archives of the old world.